Go Math 10-2, lesson 10-2, and today we're continuing our discussion of area equals base times height in geometry. Okay, and I really want you to hone in on that formula because that formula is going to be used for everything we do here. So yesterday, or in the previous lesson, we looked at a rectangle and we looked at a parallelogram, and we realized that if we cut a parallelogram and add it over here, it becomes a rectangle. So both of those are solved using the formula area equals base times height. So today I want to talk about a right triangle. And so you might ask yourself, all right, so I have a right triangle, Mr. Wohlseigel, I can't necessarily use area equals base times height to find a right triangle. You can if you recognize one thing. And to do that, I am going to go to your book. Usually I do one first, and then I go to your book, but your book does a really nice job of explaining this. So I have a grid here, and they want the rectangle with a base of 6 units, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and a height of 5 units, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I draw myself a nice rectangle, and I'm going to go ahead and make my line a little bit bigger here. Oops. Let's make it this, and we'll color that in nicely. Just so everybody at home can see this. All right, well done. So what we end up with is area equals base times height. Well, my base is 6 and my height is 5. So 6 times 5, my area of this is 30 units squared. From yesterday, we know this. You're following us at home. That's perfect. But now what happens if I realize that taking this particular object and cutting it in half makes a right triangle? Now I have a right triangle. I can't use area equals base times height because it's not a rectangle anymore. But if I take area equals base times height, then I realize that I'm solving for 1/2 of the base times the height. That's why the formula for a triangle is half of a rectangle. And that's simple enough. I can still use that same formula to solve for my answer. Well, if I know that the height is still 5 on this side, because this side doesn't exist anymore, my base is still 6, well, 5 times 6. So I would start with the formula area equals 1/2 6 times 5. 1/2 times 6 is 3 times 5. My area equals 15 units squared. Now I go back and ask myself, my rectangle was 30 units squared, and half of that is 15 units squared. You can see that a triangle is just half of a rectangle. So if I know how to solve for a rectangle or a parallelogram, when I cut it in half, I find myself solving for a triangle. So if I were to go back and pick 2 of these very quickly, I know that my formula equals area equals, if it's a rectangle, it would be base times height, but I only want half of that rectangle. So half of the base times the height. They may call it something different, length times width, whatever it may be, but you and I both know that we're still solving for a base and a height. So we can just keep that same terminology. It's really easy to remember. Area equals 1/2 8 times 10. Well, 1/2 of 8 is 4. 4 times 10 is 40. My area equals 40 inches squared, because we're still talking about 2 dimensions, a height and a width. It is a squared dimension. If we're looking at the rectangle itself, it would be 8 times 10, which is 80, so obviously half of that works. This is the most important part of all of it in geometry. If you do not start with a formula, you do not write out the steps, and you try to solve it in your head, you are going to make mistakes. So take the time and do it correctly. Let's look at one more. If I start with the same formula, I know that I have a rectangle, but I want to solve for this triangle here. So I'm going to cut it in half. Area equals 1/2 of base times height. So area equals 1/2 times 4 times 11. Area equals 2 times 11. Area equals 22 yards squared, because these are yards. If I were solving for the rectangle itself, 4 times 11 would be 44, and half of that's 22. So always, 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 ladies and gentlemen, This is going to be everything. Area equals base times height. Then how does a triangle relate to a rectangle? It's half of it. So the formula for a triangle is area equals 1/2 base times height. Start with a formula, plug in what you know, take your time and solve it.